Donald Trump is asking a federal court to let his name go back onto the Kennedy Center in a new form. The striking part is the argument attached to that request. His filing portrays Trump's recognition as essential to the institution's financial and physical survival, while the financial picture described in internal budget records points in the opposite direction. That matters because this is no longer simply a fight over branding. It is a test of whether presidential power, public money, cultural institutions, and personal recognition are being mixed together in a way Americans would tolerate from any president. And the question is straightforward. Does the evidence support the claim that Trump is rescuing the Kennedy Center, or does the rescue narrative conflict with what happened after he took control? Start with what Trump is actually seeking. A federal judge had previously blocked the effort to rename the institution the Trump Kennedy Center and ordered Trump's name removed. According to the court dispute, Trump's side has now pursued a different route. Instead of simply renaming the building, the proposal will place an inscription on the front recognizing that it was renovated and restored by President Donald J. Trump. Another inscription would reference the Trump Kennedy Center Fund, and the surrounding site would become the President Donald J. Trump Plaza. That distinction is central to the legal strategy. The argument is essentially that an acknowledgement of restoration or financial support is not the same legal act as renaming the Kennedy Center itself. That could matter in court, but politically, look at what is happening. A president whose name was ordered removed is pursuing another mechanism that could put his name prominently back on the same building. And the filing goes considerably further than defending the legality of an inscription. It describes the Kennedy Center as being in terrible trouble. It says the crisis is so severe that without the Trump administration, its personnel, and President Trump, the center cannot survive structurally or financially. It describes the building as dangerously dilapidated, outdated, decrepit, structurally unsound, and fundamentally unsafe. Those are extraordinary claims because they transform the dispute. Trump's recognition is not presented merely as ceremonial gratitude. His administration is effectively arguing that Trump is central to the institution's survival. Now compare that with the financial chronology. Budget and meeting documents described in reporting about the Kennedy Center indicate that ticket revenue and fundraising deteriorated sharply after Trump assumed control and after the board moved to attach his name to the institution. The center was reportedly on pace to miss its annual revenue target by nearly $100 million. Donations were also reported to be roughly 25% below target after the renaming vote. That does not prove Trump personally caused every lost dollar. Cultural institutions have complicated finances, and correlation alone cannot establish why every donor stopped donating or why every ticket went unsold. But it creates a problem that the rescue narrative has to answer. If your argument is that this leadership is indispensable to financial survival, and the institution experiences a major revenue deterioration during that leadership, then you need evidence explaining the gap. You cannot simply point to the institution's financial condition as proof that the people currently running it are the solution. That is the first major distinction to keep in mind. Evidence of a crisis is not evidence that the person claiming to solve the crisis is actually solving it. And the filing makes an even stronger assertion. It argues that Trump's efforts and prestige provide the sole hope for the center's financial survival and structural renewal. Sole hope. Think about the evidentiary burden created by those words. This is not merely saying Trump can help. It is not saying his administration obtained funding. It is saying the institution's survival effectively depends upon him. The filing points to substantial federal support and a new donor strategy. It says, Trump obtained $258 million from Congress for capital restoration and describes efforts to build an endowment capable of financing major structural improvements. That is the strongest defense of what the administration is doing. If the building genuinely requires extensive repairs, if Congress has supplied hundreds of millions of dollars for restoration, and if the current leadership can establish a sustainable donor base, then recognizing those contributions is not inherently irrational. Major cultural institutions routinely recognize donors and people responsible for important projects. That argument deserves to be considered seriously, but it does not automatically justify personally engraving the sitting president's name onto a national memorial And it certainly does not establish that Trump himself is the institution's sole hope. There is another distinction here that is easy to miss. Congressional funding is public money. If Congress appropriates hundreds of millions of dollars for renovations, Americans are financing those renovations through their government. A president may advocate for that funding or administer the project, but public financing does not become a personal donation simply because a president supports it. So, ask yourself a narrower question than whether you like Trump. If a Democratic president obtained congressional funding to renovate a federal cultural institution and then sought a prominent inscription crediting that president personally, what standard would you apply? Whatever that standard is, apply it here. The stakes rise because the filing connects recognition of Trump to fundraising. It argues that without prominent recognition of the Trump administration and President Trump, donors will not contribute and the center will remain trapped in financial and structural decline. That is an empirical claim. And if it becomes central to the case, the obvious evidence would be donor commitments, fundraising records, pledges, and the financial performance before and after these decisions. Because the available numbers create tension. On one side, the administration says recognition of Trump is necessary to attract money. On the other, reported budget documents indicate donations and revenue have fallen dramatically during the period in which Trump's control and branding became defining features of the institution. Both things could theoretically be true. Perhaps an entirely new donor base is emerging, while the old one disappears. Perhaps restoration commitments have not yet translated into current revenue. But those explanations need evidence. That is where political persuasion can fool reasonable people. A dramatic filing can establish that a crisis exists without establishing who caused it or who can fix it. Don't Get Played gives you a repeatable way to separate those claims before staking your credibility on them. The digital ebook is $9, one time. Use the first link in the description or pinned comment. And there is a much more consequential sentence in this filing. Trump's side says that without these efforts, the Kennedy Center could deteriorate into an unsafe and decrepit structure that ultimately would have to be taken down. It then discusses the possibility of replacing it with something different, including a large outdoor amphitheater overlooking the Potomac. That means demolition has entered the argument. Not necessarily as an immediate order to send bulldozers tomorrow. And that distinction matters. The filing frames demolition as a potential consequence if the center cannot be restored successfully. But introducing the destruction of the existing Kennedy Center, while simultaneously arguing that Trump must receive prominent recognition, creates unmistakable political pressure around the dispute. The message becomes, approve the restoration approach and recognition being pursued, or the existing institution may eventually disappear. That is a far more serious proposition than changing some letters on a facade. Remember what this institution is. The Kennedy Center is a congressionally designated living memorial to President John F. Kennedy. So decisions involving its identity have a public dimension beyond normal corporate naming rights. The administration's legal response says its proposed inscriptions are not memorials under the relevant statute. Instead, it characterizes them as acknowledgments of renovation, restoration, and financial support, comparable to recognition commonly found at other cultural institutions. That may ultimately become one of the important legal distinctions. The administration also argues that the board has authority to name the grounds. It points to an earlier naming of part of the site known as the Reach as evidence that the board already exercises naming authority over areas surrounding the center. And there is another complication involving Representative Joyce Beatty, who challenged the actions. The filing argues that Beatty lacks standing to challenge the Plaza decision because of her status as an ex officio, non-voting board member. And it claims she had previously expressed no objection to that component of the plan. Beatty opposed the August 13th measure, according to the filing, while Trump's attorneys characterize her position on the grounds, naming more narrowly. Those procedural questions matter. Courts do not decide cases simply because a political controversy looks unusual. Standing, statutory authority, the exact wording of prior orders, and the legal distinction between naming a memorial and acknowledging a renovation can determine what a judge is allowed to do. So, the strongest version of Trump's defense is not difficult to articulate. The Kennedy Center needs major physical investment. Congress has approved substantial restoration funding. The current board believes Trump's involvement can attract new donors. Recognition of restoration work is different from formally renaming the memorial. And the board argues it possesses authority over the surrounding grounds. Parts of that defense could survive legal scrutiny even if you find the underlying politics distasteful. But the financial defense faces a harder factual problem. If the institution is currently suffering major revenue and donation shortfalls, then claims of a financial turnaround need to be measured against actual performance rather than promises of future fundraising. And there is evidence of a broader institutional consequence beyond accounting. Ben Folds, who had served as an artistic advisor to the National Symphony Orchestra, described the takeover as an authoritarian intervention into the arts. His concern was not merely that programming would change. His argument was that government control over a major artistic institution could become part of a wider effort to influence cultural expression. That is his interpretation, not a judicial finding, but it identifies the larger issue Americans should watch. Presidents appoint people. Administrations change priorities. Political disagreement over publicly supported cultural institutions is inevitable. The more unusual question is whether a sitting president should exercise government power over a national cultural institution while simultaneously pursuing permanent personal recognition from that institution. Those two interests are difficult to separate. Trump is not merely a donor asking for his name on a wall. He is the President of the United States. His administration exercises enormous power. The board structure changed under his leadership. Congress controls federal appropriations, and litigation is now determining how far the institution can go in attaching his name to a memorial dedicated to another president. That concentration of authority is why the standard matters more than anyone's opinion of Donald Trump. Imagine the precedent detached completely from his name. A future president takes control of the leadership of a major national institution. The institution receives hundreds of millions in public funding. The president then argues that the institution depends upon his personal prestige and seeks a permanent inscription, crediting himself. Would Americans want that to become normal? Because once you create a standard for one president, you should expect another president to use it. There is also an unresolved factual question that should not disappear beneath the political argument: the actual physical condition of the Kennedy Center. The filing uses extremely severe language about structural danger and possible calamity. Those descriptions should ultimately be judged against engineering assessments, inspections, renovation requirements, and other technical evidence. A court filing asserting that a building is unsafe is not by itself the same thing as an independent structural evaluation establishing imminent collapse. That distinction matters because the demolition argument depends heavily on the severity of the building's condition. If engineers establish that extensive reconstruction is genuinely necessary, the administration's case for dramatic intervention becomes stronger. If the physical danger is overstated, then invoking potential demolition looks considerably different. And that brings us back to the contradiction at the center of this dispute. The administration portrays Trump as indispensable to saving the Kennedy Center financially and structurally. Yet, reported internal financial documents show substantial deterioration in revenue and fundraising during the period of Trump-led control and branding. The record does support several narrower conclusions. There is a genuine legal fight over what recognition can be placed on the Kennedy Center and its grounds. Trump's side is pursuing inscriptions and plaza naming after the earlier effort to put his name directly onto the Kennedy Center was blocked. Congress has provided substantial money for restoration. The administration claims the institution faces severe structural and financial problems, and the institution has experienced serious reported revenue and donation shortfalls. What the available evidence does not establish is the sweeping proposition that Trump personally represents the Kennedy Center's only path to survival. Nor does a revenue decline, standing alone, prove that every financial problem was caused by Trump. Those are precisely the competing claims that deserve evidence rather than political instinct. The court can resolve the legal questions before it. Engineers can establish the building's physical condition. Financial records can show whether fundraising actually recovers. And the public can decide whether a sitting president, using political authority, while seeking permanent personal recognition, meets the standard Americans want applied to every future administration. That is why this dispute matters beyond one building and one name. It is about where public stewardship ends and personal commemoration begins. And very soon, another political filing, statistic, poll, accusation, or official explanation will ask you to make the same kind of judgment before all the context reaches you. Don't Get Played is a digital method for becoming harder to manipulate and better able to defend your political convictions with evidence. It is $9, one time, through the first link in the description or pinned comment. Political reaction is immediate. A defensible conclusion has to survive the evidence.